What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another episode. We are not with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes, though. We're talking with Morten Stig Jensen of the NBA podcast. He also covers the league for Yahoo Sports and Forbes, as well as doing some work for Sports Illustrated. Does a whole lot, does it super well. He wanted to have me on his podcast, the NBA podcast, to talk about the Knicks. He has graciously allowed me to post it here. We also will be doing, for a YouTube exclusive, we're grading every NBA City Edition uniform for the 2024-2025 season. That'll be a YouTube exclusive. If you're an audio listener, I have included it at the end of this podcast in case you would like to check it out. Don't want to deprive you, but I think the visual element is important. Probably not going up on YouTube until later this week just because I need to edit it a little bit more. So enjoy that if you're into those things, but let's not delay this any further. Subscribe the whole nine to us if you haven't already, but we're going to talk a bunch of Knicks with Mort from the NBA podcast.
We have to start with your local team, though. I mean, you're not a one-team guy, but if there is a team you follow a little bit more than others, it has to be the Knicks.
I get accused of being a Thunder homer in our YouTube comments. I love it. I'm not complaining. I fucking love
that. Look, I mean, Brian, he basically left the Sixers for the Thunder during the last year that we were together. So
yes, you can check out our podcast, Thunder Buddies, coming shortly. Yeah.
Yep. Seth MacFarlane directed it. Yeah.
But yes, the Knicks.
The Knicks. We have to talk about the Knicks. Look, there are some, I want to say, popular overarching themes that we just have to get into, even though I don't know where I'm leaning on it quite yet, but the Mikal Bridges jump shot, we just have to get into it. It's such an odd season for him. So obviously he changed his mechanics for insert reason here that makes sense to him. And the 3-point shot has been very unreliable, but he is absolutely king of the mid-range. Like, it seems like he never misses a two. I'm not
69% on twos outside the paint right now.
Nice.
So I agree with you.
Yep. Nice. That is a phenomenal percentage. So I have no idea what to take away from this change shot, if anything. Like, does this matter? Is this anything? What the hell, Dan? Make us smarter.
I am wondering. Look, part of me just wonders if it's like, is the way he's shooting better equipped to make shots from shorter distances, because he's been fine from the corners. It's really, when you look at the percentages, he's at 18% on above the break threes.
Right.
And it's just like, I mean, he's not taking a ton of corner. I mean, 43 corner threes, like at this point in the season, actually is a lot of corner threes. 49% from the corners right now. So it's the above the break. And so I think you start to dig into it and you look at some of the looks and it's like, well, I mean, they're quality looks. And I feel like they're just going to start to fall, which is honestly just what I default to at this point. So it would be something I'm concerned about. But when you get to him, I'm actually more concerned. Now, when we get to the playoffs, I think the concerns could technically change a little bit, because and I'm sure we'll get into this, I've been more of not an alarmist, but I don't know if the Knicks have enough secondary creation outside of Jalen Brunson when you're going up against playoff defenses. Right. But I've been just personally, and I mean, it's easy to say this when the Knicks are second, third in points scored per 100 possessions right now. I've been more concerned about Mikal Bridges' defense than his offense at the moment. And so I kind of look at what's happened with Bridges. Starts the season kind of awful, but like you said, the mid-range percentages are there. I'm talking about the corner threes they're going in. Mm-hmm. He's up to 37.5% on wide open threes in general. I just think that number will probably tick up, and the overall number from above the break will tick up. I'm not worried about his offense in the regular season. I'm more worried about, is this the guy who the Knicks thought they traded for on the defensive end? And to this point, the answer has been no. And I think you saw that against their most recent Nets game, where it's, OG Anunoby's guarding more at the point of attack. And you wanted Mikal Bridges to be that guy so OG Anunoby can do everything else. And now OG Anunoby's just doing everything.
I wonder if they're using him a little bit more as a secondary defender because of the long arms that come in and contest shots off the weak side. But it's a good point. I honestly have not taken a lot of note of him, struggling defensively. I still think he's in the top tier. Look, I'm also used to watching Josh Giddey, so like that might be a pretty poor contrast. But like, I haven't noticed defensive concerns. I have admittedly been a little worried about the load up on his shots. Like offensively is where I'm a little bit more less
I
at
think
ease.
for sure. And during crunch time too, I think you can kind of see the impact where it's taking him. We're not even just talking about the form on his jumper and the length of
Yeah.
time there, but like the decision making feels like a touch or three slower. And the Knicks do not. I think as of right now, actually, they're 28th in offensive rating in crunch time. Again, we're talking about a small sample size, but they played a few games in there now, and they've deviated from their process a little bit too much during those stretches. I think Jalen Brunson is coming around, hasn't had the best start to the year, but he's clearly banged up. He's trying to figure out, like he has a ton more spacing, and he's just had huge moment. I mean, look, just to go back to that, their most recent win over the Nets, where it's all their starters score 20 points except for Jalen Brunson. Like he's kind of reading the room and figuring out, getting better and better, I guess, each game of what version of him they need. But yeah, the Mikal Bridges stuff offensively, I do think it's impacted them maybe almost the most, kind of when you're looking at fourth quarter offense hasn't been great overall, and then their crunch time offense, of course. And so, like, it's not even just, again, the speed at which he's getting off jumpers and maybe the accuracy on those from above the break. It's everything about his offensive game in those moments has felt slower, and that's
Right.
a problem.
It almost feels like to me, and again, you can correct me on this, but it feels like it's when he's in movement, when he's taking shots off the dribble in movement, like when he's running towards a jump shot or just running towards the ball, gets it and like goes into a jumper right off the catch instead of like settling in, loading up. It looks much cleaner, almost like he occasionally shoots it like he did last year, just by sheer like, oh yeah, I need to get up a shots within 0.2 seconds here. I don't know if it had something to do with that, but it's something that I want to track as the season goes on, because at this point, I do think you need another shot maker, someone who can just go in and bend defense a little bit more. The Knicks right now are not winning in the pace game, for example. They're the worst in the league in pace. They're 30th. Need to, and I was honestly envisioning this team coming out and running a lot because of Bridges. Like, we have talked, we talked about Bridges and KD as some of the best plug and play players in the NBA, right? So I was kind of thinking, with them in hand, with Karl-Anthony Towns as the trailer, with Jalen in there and OG Anunoby also being a floor stretcher, I thought the Knicks would run a lot more than what they have. And when they kind of load up on the half court sets and Bridges is struggling a little bit, I'm left uninspired but what they have been able to achieve offensively so far this season.
That it's weird that we're harping so much on the offense and people are doing it because they have a top 5 offense and it doesn't feel necessarily convincing. I think it's gotten a little bit more convincing since that, kind of the first leg, let's say the first half of the whatever in 15% of the way through the season. So the first 7.5% looked worse than the last 7.5% of the season has. There probably is room for them to run a little bit more. I think, especially like they will get out and run after they're forcing a turnover. But they're not a team right now. I haven't checked in a minute, but like,
no, they're really bad at forcing turnovers.
Yeah. So they're still bad there, but they have room to run for sure. They're a good defensive rebounding team. You could definitely, instead of saying, okay, hey, like we need to find Jalen Brunson or get him the ball or slow things down. You could get out and run more there. I probably would push back and say, I think with Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns both on the court, you're not built to do that. The idea was probably to do it more with maybe some of those bench units. But yeah, there's definitely room to run. There's definitely room for them to run more and create some chaos. And honestly, I think what you bring up is an interesting point and maybe might matter a little bit more in the playoffs is if you don't have that guy who can break down defenses, even with Mikal shooting he's got like 68.8% on pull-up twos. So like even factoring, like filtering out some of the other stuff from mid-range, that's not like advantage creation necessarily. And so if you lack, like who is the second, I want to ask you, who is the second best advantage creator on the Knicks right now?
Towns.
Probably. And he's not a very good advantage creator. Like this is someone who is attacking closeouts. You want to dump into him in the post, but like if you need him to do something other than capitalize off a mismatch or capitalize in open space, I would say he's underqualified to be that guy. I think Towns has been fantastic for the most. Like honestly, defensively, I don't know what other people were expecting, to be clear. And I think they're still trying to figure out how to use him. But when you look at Mikal Bridges, or just the setup of the Knicks in general, a way to create chaos and make it easier for your offense would be like, well, let's go up against these defenses that don't have a chance to get set. And we've seen that in the past with some of these like Brunson, like without Brunson units, because that's their best way of like creating offense. And I think there's still room for them to do that this year. Now, as they get healthier, does that make it a little bit easier? I honestly don't know. Like, are Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa going to be that integral, like getting them running in some of their secondary units? I'd argue probably not. Like, the bigger issue might be, okay, are these guys equipped to run when they're just playing so many minutes? Where I know Knicks fans want to, there's always an excuse for why Thibodeau plays these guys a lot. And the Knicks are shallow. Some of these games, they've been pretty banged up. They are missing two guys in Achiuwa and Mitchell Robinson, who I would say do factor into, I guess, like we'll say top 8, top 7 of their rotation. So yes, that matters. But like when you have to play guys 40 or more minutes to win against the Nets, like I don't care that you're missing Precious Achiuwa and Mitchell Robinson in that one. That's going to be an issue. So I don't know if that's like been a reason for maybe why they're not running as much, because even with Jalen Brunson off the floor, the Knicks rank in the 4th percentile of transition frequency. And so like there's room for that number to come up. I'm just wondering functionally, is that okay? Like these guys are just playing so many minutes. What do you want them to do? Or is it because if you don't have that decided offensive hierarchy without Jalen Brunson, which you don't, like you can gravitate towards Towns or Bridges, and like they've wanted to glue Towns to OG Anunoby, so maybe that's impacting things. There's definitely room for them to be more creative on offense, but I think that creativity that you're looking for specifically, I don't see it happening in their core unit where like you have Jalen Brunson. I don't see that as something that's realistic.
No, and you hit the nail on the head with the lack of forcing turnovers, because if you're not forcing those, you're going to be limited in coming out and running and getting those easy points. I do think Mitchell Robinson, though, I think he'll help to some extent. So we know that he's an elite shot blocker, or at least that he is able to challenge shots near the rim. Right now, you don't really have anyone that stands out who are playing high level rotation minutes. Towns is not a shot blocker necessarily, neither is OG. So I wonder if you have those trips, more or less, where the ball is being swatted away, it's recovered, you run down the floor, and then where Towns kind of stops at the 3-point line because he's looking for, the 3 off a trailing play. And that's the smart play, by the way. You have a Mitchell Robinson who's running straight to the damn rim, drawing in a defender, and I think that opens up some driving lanes, which we're not really seeing right now. Well, we're seeing it when Towns also dives. I just don't think he dives that much.
Yeah, I mean, that could certainly be something that would help, but I don't know, like, do you have to get to a point where your personnel is a little bit different to unlock that? And like you're saying, maybe Mitchell Robinson can do, but now you're talking about, so are you playing Mitchell Robinson and Karl-Anthony Towns together? Because those pass to the baskets that maybe you're talking about are not going to be, like, they're not going to be available if Mitchell Robinson is on the court.
No, it does feel like this is a puzzle that's yet to be like fully solved. What do you think is missing? Like for this team to get up on the Boston level, what does it need?
So I think it's one of two things that stand out to me. Is I think we could focus on like, okay, it would be nice if they had a secondary creator, but like Campaign's been fine in his role this year. You have Jalen Brunson, you have Mikal Bridges, you have Karl-Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby's look pretty confident attacking closeouts. Josh Hart can be reticent to shoot from 3, but he will attack. I think what they really need, and I think one of these is a big problem. You knew what you were kind of getting into with Towns, and they're still doing like the Thibodeau stuff. Like when you look at the shot profile they're allowing, like teams aren't shooting a ton at them, but shooting a ton at the rim, like relative to the frequency of their shots. 31% of opponent shots are coming at the rim against the Knicks. That's a certainly more than doable number. They're even limiting like those short mid-range opportunities. And I think even when you kind of look at, okay, well, they're only opponents shooting 65% at the rim. That's 12th this year. The Knicks are getting burned from floater range, but that could come down. They're really getting burned from 3 a lot. And I don't look at it and say, if I tell you that opponents are shooting 38% from 3 against the Knicks, that's not a number that you look at and say, well, that's unsustainably high, regardless of how poorly it ranks. So to me, what stands out is, yeah, they could use a different center look, maybe someone who could play next to Towns, or a different type of rim protector, maybe someone who's going to give you more of those block shots, which will by extension create transition opportunities. But I look at it as saying, well, like you knew what you were doing when you were getting Towns, and you knew what you were conceding and the trickle down effect that was going to have on everybody else. The bigger issue to me has been the point of attack defense. And so, yes, the solve could be OG Anunoby, but then I think that that's going to really make you, I know you mentioned Mikal Bridges' length. He's not going to be the same level of deterrent or someone who could rumble with some of the bigger players.
Agreed.
as OG. And so if you're going to move OG to defending the point of attack, yeah, he can do it. But one, he's already playing a ton of minutes. So you want him doing even more. And then two, now you're sacrificing even more on the low line. Josh Hart, you could try it more, but that's not Josh Hart either. And Jalen Brunson, he will be picked on if Mikal Bridges is not that guy. And when I look at Mikal Bridges, I think the primary difference, and a lot of it I assigned to him going to Brooklyn, assuming a much larger offensive role, being much more central there, that, okay, I was expecting a tick down in defense, but like that dude is eminently screenable right now. And they need someone who's going to be more aggressive, more firm in those situations. And so like you can throw out different names for that, but it feels like what they would need is, this is a name I've mentioned. I don't know if they have enough to get him. He's played really well in Portland. Tamani Kamara. When you're looking at someone who is like that player is like, well, he can actually solve some of your, if you want OG at the point of attack, then you slide Tamani into like what you want OG doing behind Towns or like from the weak side, anything along those lines, or defending bigger players. But Tamani Kamara, honestly, I call him a 4 position defender. He might be close to 5 at this point. So they need someone like that. Maybe not as good as Tamani Kamara. Maybe it's just specifically someone who could come in and defend the point of attack, who is bigger than Deuce McBride, or who is someone that, well, if we have to bounce, let's say, some minutes from Josh Hart, or it's do you even, you might want to frame it, do we need someone to supplant some of OG's minutes to where, okay, maybe the point of attack defense isn't perfect, or we have someone who gives you the option of moving him around like OG. So OG is playing fewer minutes, but then you also have minutes where you're playing them together. Tamani Kamara fits that to a T, which is why I've sort of harped on him. Now, I think some people might argue that Precious Achiuwa can fill that role. I would, when it comes to point of attack, I've seen it. The answer is no. Point of attack, Achiuwa is not going to do that. Now, could you move OG to point of attack when Precious Achiuwa is on the court? Yes, but now you're making more concessions there. You're making offensive concessions as well. So I look at the Knicks as they need that player. If you put Tamani Kamara on this team, that's so stupid of me to say. There are other names that you could latch onto.
No, but that's a really good name though.
Bill, the other name I've thought about, I just don't know if they have they can figure out the salary. I know the Knicks are like, they could just do a 2-for-1. It'd be Mitchell Robinson plus a smaller salary plus, okay, what is the pick equity? Is that Washington pick worth it? Do you include a swap? But like Isaiah Stewart would make a shit ton of sense on this team, because you can play him next to Towns. Then you can have OG Anunoby at the point of attack without sacrificing any of the other I would say not any of the other, but many of the other responsibilities. Play Stewart at the 5, play him next to Towns. Doesn't matter. So those are the 2 names that I've kind of latched onto, because I think what's problematic is you kind of need this very specific type of player now, where it's always like, look at New Orleans. I don't think it's this dramatic, but like the exact type of big man you want alongside Zion Williamson. I do criticize the Pelicans for never gotten that guy. But like there are like 7 of them, and that might be generous that you could. That's why everyone was always Brook Lopez, Miles Turner, Brook Lopez, Miles Turner, Brook Lopez. Oh, Kristaps, Brook Lopez, Miles Turner. There are so few. And for the Knicks, because it's not just about the point of attack, it's, well, we need someone who's not going to at least concede too much of this 5-out spacing that we've set up, or 4.5-out spacing, depending on how you feel about Josh Hart. And so it's, well, we need someone who we can plug in and say, well, he's going to take some of Josh Hart's minutes. Like, that's not compromising our spacing even worse. Or is, if we're giving him some of OG's minutes, we don't want OG playing 40 plus minutes a night or whatever, that he's going, like Tamani Kamara shot the ball well from 3 basically since going to Portland. He can attack some closeouts too, he's shown. That's also why I've latched on. That's what makes it difficult for the Knicks, because you don't want to, I don't want to use the word submarine. I think compromise is the right word. You don't want this offense coming down a tick, because if you're going to hover around the bottom 10 in defense, and by the way, they have played, I think this season, only 2 top 10 offenses. I know the Nets are close to a top 10 offense, but Boston and Cleveland, I believe, are the only top 10 offenses they've played while we record this. So like the defense could actually be worse than we think it is at this point. There, if you filter out the Celtics game, I think they're 15th in points allowed per possession. But one, filtering out the Celtics game is kind of bold when you want to measure yourself against the Celtics.
Right.
And 2, now we're talking about only 1 top 10 offense sprinkled in there. So that's my long-winded way of saying, like, we could probably turn this into an overarching discussion, or the framing of this is, are the Knicks a serious title contender? I think they are a better team than we've shown. They've been so up and down, which I think we've seen it with Minnesota. You make a seismic trade that close to the start of the season where you don't have a lot of time for players to digest it, and you barely have time to like go through training camp and a preseason with it, it will matter. But the answer is still no. even when you take in improvement, because they're still missing. They still feel one player away. And I would argue, because Mitchell Robinson is not Isaiah Stewart, because Precious Achiuwa is not a Tamani Kamara, they're one player away who is not on the team.
Part of the reason I kind of wanted them to lean into the offense was partly because I thought they'd sort of half punted on the defense anyway. This isn't Town slander in any way. I mean, like you said earlier,
he's been inconsistent at points, but one that is, for anyone, a Knicks fan who might be listening to this who didn't watch Karl-Anthony Towns religiously, that is the Karl-Anthony Towns experience. Correct. I would argue he's been he's been what they traded for, especially relative to what they gave up. Like, if you didn't make that trade, do you think the Knicks are any better on defense right now? Dante DiVincenzo is going to put up fight, but like, you're not, with Mitchell Robinson out, are you really any better on defense at the moment?
No, I don't think so.
No. And so the issue is, and we need to, maybe we don't need to stop doing this because they gave up a lot to get him. But like, even if you say, let's not measure him against how much the Knicks gave up for him in Bridges, like, that has been, like, you went all in on this player who I don't think solves, if you want to create an offensive concern, he doesn't solve your biggest offensive concern for them right now. And he's not elevating the defense the way that, the Wingstop nickname you gave to Bridges and OG, like, it's better suited for Josh Hart or like McBride and OG at this point. So and I still think Bridges has been overall, like, he's been fine, but when you give up that much, or when you empty your asset clip, is the way I framed it, is that you better have figured out a way to make life easier on your most important player. The Knicks have done that with their spacing, but are they any less dependent on Jalen Brunson? The answer is no. The answer is no. But yes, their offensive rating with him off the court, like, his on-off stuff is weird right now. But like, you figure out a way to run your offense without him, but like, not in a way that I personally think is necessarily going to hold up in the playoffs. And so that slims out your margin for error in the context of, if I told you they're going to be the second best offense in the NBA and 19th in defense, just throwing out numbers here, you're probably like, that's fringe title content. Like, you're good enough on offense and not terrible enough on defense to, like, that works. But the way that they've gotten there on offense thus far, it makes you think, well, then you better be like 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th on defense at this point. I don't know if they have the personnel to do that. Maybe Mitchell Robinson comes back in the Towns, Mitchell Robinson, maybe Robinson just as the best backup center in the NBA, a big deal. Or maybe the Robinson Towns minutes are still super great offensively, because one of the Knicks' most efficient shots the past couple of years was Mitchell Robinson gets an offensive rebound and finds a 3-point shooter. And like, now you just have Towns. So maybe there's that dynamic, but I find myself more concerned with the defense, and Mikal Bridges is actually a part of that, as well as the offense. And I don't mean to dump on him, but when you invest that much in one player, and I would argue, I think you always kind of knew, maybe you definitely didn't think he'd shoot 18% on above the break threes through the first whatever games of the season. Sure.
Or not get to the free throw line, which is another lost aspect, which I think is
that's the other thing, is like, I look at him and like, we know that the Knicks aren't going to do a ton of off-ball stuff anyway. That's something I could have predicted. It's really the defensive, it's the 3-point shooting slide off, sure, but the defensive slide off, like, that's the thing you look at and say, oh, okay, like, this is a bigger deal, because if he's not going to be our number 2 on offense, and then he's also not good, has he been their second best defender this year?
That's a good question. I mean, as I see it, yes, but I mean, you watch them more closely than I do. So if I missed something, I would put OG number 1 for sure.
Okay, I think OG, honestly, OG's been their best player.
Yeah, I would actually agree with you on that. He's been by far the more consistent. You feel his presence far more. I struggle to see who else. Like, Josh Hart has had moments defensively where I think that's been noteworthy. I don't know if it's because Mikal is sort of a deterrent stuff.
I'll come out and say their second best defender this year has been Deuce McBride. Like, they're just for what they need. It's been him. Okay,
that's interesting. So, I didn't have him all up there in part because of like the size. Like, he fights over screens. He's a pest. But I do think there are situations where he's sort of a mosquito who you can slap away.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's not going to be able to, the stuff you mentioned with Bridges against bigger players around the basket. He can't do that. Bridges is still more versatile. He's the better player by far in a vacuum, but their second best defender to me has been Deuce McBride. And that's probably debatable. And if you say Mikal Bridges has been their second best defender, he has not been a good enough second best defender, particularly when your actual second best defender in Mitchell Robinson is out. So that is their issue. And I think you can look at it in one of two ways where, well, this is good because Bridges should probably get better. But I really do look at the defensive stuff and it makes me think, well, they might need a player that they don't have right now. Not to say they need to upgrade from Bridges, but they need to like, I don't even know how to frame it properly. I think I've already said it, where it's just like you need the guy who is either going to allow OG Anunoby to do some of the stuff you thought Mikal Bridges was going to do for you, or you just need someone who's bigger than Deuce McBride to do more of the Mikal Bridges stuff.
Or you just need Mikal Bridges Phoenix Suns era, because that's...
Is there a chance that that's just gone? Or like he's not, his role is probably bigger it's bigger in New York than it was in the heyday of those Suns, like when they weren't injured. So could you just say he's going to adjust? But like, if you think his offensive workload is still contributing to what he's doing on defense, like that offensive workload ain't getting any smaller just because Mitchell Robinson comes back. Like that's not changing. So I do think the Knicks are a better team than I think they're a more consistent team than we've seen. Like I do think they'll still finish above 500, and I don't view them in the same league as Cleveland or Boston, but could they be the third best team, but like actual third best team, not, they were 42-40 and they're the third best team in the East, which might apparently happen this year. I think they are better than that. But if you want to get to that level that you gave up all these assets to get, like there is no gap year. There is no feeling out year. When you give up as much as the Knicks did, never mind Towns, but to get Mikal Bridges, it was decided it's title contention for us now. Right. They're not there. They're like, you can argue, well, if they're the third best team in the East, their chance of getting, okay, sure. But that's not why you give up what they did for Mikal Bridges or do what they did over the offseason. You do what they did to just be mentioned decidedly in the same breath as Boston, like what Cleveland's being mentioned in now, like what OKC is being mentioned in now. You don't want to have people equivocate on your place in the pecking order. And there's a lot of room to equivocate on these Knicks right now.
But you do agree, though, that the weapons at their disposal are of high quality. It comes down to how they're utilized in some respects, which leads me to this last question before we have to move on. Is this current iteration of the Knicks roster best suited to Tibbs or someone else?
Don't do this to me. Come on.
I have to ask.
I've been labeled as a Thibodeau hater, and over the past season and a half, I think he's been a lot more flexible than even he's probably been credited for on a national level. I know Knicks fans they credit him a pretty good deal. The minute stuff, like that's a real thing. There's always an excuse, but like the reason you have the reason fans get like, why wasn't Huck Porty playing more in that game again? Like you just want someone to take, like, that's not even, first of all, I'm more worried about you can't call like, well, that's why Josh Hart is here so that he can play all these minutes. Like, well, yes and no. Like, yes, Mikal Bridges is an Iron Man, but every player has their breaking point.
Yes.
That stuff you could quibble over whether it's a Tibbs thing or just the available personnel right now. I think they've gotten here on offense to where they are. I don't know which coach you're putting in here. Maybe if you put Kenny Atkinson on the Knicks, are you going to feel better about their offense in a playoff setting relative to their personnel? Like, I know what he's done in Cleveland has been fantastic. You might feel a little better, Mort, but like they have two other options aside from Donovan Mitchell, just in Darius Garland and what we know Evan Mobley could be. That, like, as self-creators and self-starters or drivers of offense for others, I don't know that you could look at anyone on the Knicks and say, well, they have that second guy. It might be Towns with some of the passing that we've seen from him in Minnesota, but also in New York. There might be a conversation to be had about Tibbs, but it is also tough to fault him when, look, the offense is elite statistically right now. It has not been elite in crunch time. If that's what you're going to, and we'd be talking about maybe 3 extra wins. Okay, fine. Is Thibodeau the difference between like what's being failed in crunch time and what, like,
no. There isn't one guy to put the blame on here whatsoever.
Right.
And that I agree with.
So it's just, who are you installing that's going to make this personnel defend better? That's what it would come down to me. And I mean, who?
I think it's because it's the overwhelming feeling of looking at this roster and feeling like you're not getting the most out of it. Like on the surface, we're talking about Jalen Brunson. We're talking about Karl-Anthony Towns. We're talking about Mikal Bridges. We're talking about OG Anunoby. That foursome is, on paper, one of the strongest in the NBA. That is a ridiculously talented foursome. I understand what you're saying, though, that only one of them is a high level creator. And in today's league, that's not enough. Now, we did see, in the years past here, Bridges take on more of a role. We've seen Towns take on more of a role. So I think the overall assumption, at least from non-Knicks fans who've now watched everything, is why can't you somehow try to create that secondary guy in the aggregate, like between Bridges and Towns? Like, is there any way you could sort of finagle that and make them into a cohesive second tier star?
I'm sure you could. I just don't know, like, what is like at this point though, what would be the grounds to make that call? You would look at, okay, and say, it would be ballsy to just say, oh, New York is, what did I say they were? They're 28th in offensive rating during crunch time, and they're actually 30th now. So I'm being too generous. It's like, we're talking about, and they've been in crunch time 7 times this year, and they're 2-5. If that's like, you have to give it the rest of this season. And I'm not prepared to sit here and say that the Knicks can't be better in crunch time, because look, I think if you go back and watch I haven't seen every crunch time possession, but if you go back and watch some of them, a lot of it's on Jalen Brunson. And like, you're not putting in, like, what is Tibbs do? Like, Jalen Brunson not passing or getting off the ball quickly enough. That's not a Tibbs thing necessarily. So I would say, look, if you're betting against, is Tibbs the answer for this roster? Or is it the field? Statistically, the answer should always be the field, because the Knicks are being measured against, did they win the title or not? Or did they make the Eastern Conference Finals or not? But I am prepared to give it more of this season if we don't think that they're, and I don't think either of us think they're being fully optimized on offense. I'm still prepared, given how well Towns has played, given how well OG's played and been empowered on the offensive end. Even Josh Hart, like, I'm still prepared to give, is it Tibbs the benefit of the doubt, leeway? I'm not prepared. I'll frame it this way. I'm not prepared to say Thibodeau is not the answer for New York. I would argue, as of right now, their situation, if you feel fantastic about this team, good for you. I'm not going to talk you out of it. But if you feel uneasy about this team, I'm going to feel uneasy more so because of the personnel and the injuries, of course, but the personnel, than I am because Tom Thibodeau is the one that's captaining the ship.
Right. And I wasn't insinuating that he was.
Oh, no, you weren't. You were outright saying it. You're a tip taker.
No, I'm just saying that he has a tendency to wear out his welcome. I do agree with you, though, that over the past couple of years, we have seen a Tibbs lean into, the 3-point shots and more offensive freedom. And that was something. Right. I mean, that was a sticking point for years and years and years. So I'm not necessarily out on Tom Thibodeau by any stretch. I just see a Knicks team very frequently that leaves stuff on the floor where you're like, what the hell is actually going on there? And look, to be fair, it's not as if they're necessarily a bad team. Look, that Bulls loss, for example, where is Josh Hart who fouled Kobe White unnecessarily. That should have been a Knicks win. Ultimately, that was just a brain fart decision by Josh Hart to come over the top there. So if we turn that, and it's then what are they, 8-5 instead? That looks better.
It looks better. And also, we both know crunch time, the results, they can be inherently random. It's a lot of the times like 3-point defense in the NBA. So like, that stuff could normalize, it could not, but that doesn't mean that there are some teams that were good in the clutch last year. Where DeMar DeRozan's contending for clutch player of the year and winning it in Chicago. What did that do for the Bulls?
Oh, absolutely nothing. Yeah.
No, couldn't even get the first round pick on his way out, apparently.
Right. And it's a fair point. I think for us who follow along, we heard all the noise. For me, I also assisted in creating the noise because when I saw this roster, I was like, this could be the second best team in the East. I was kind of shocked to see Mikal come back with that shot. I've been surprised to see him not even get to the free throw line. I've seen now for 13 games some elements where I'm beginning to doubt whether this team is going to find itself to where we talked about them. It could just be a rough start to the season. I am very much down to see where we look or how they look come 2025, for example. But if they're still just hanging around 500 at that point in time, I think you'd need to answer some overarching tough questions.
Yeah. I mean, and look, I can even argue that some of that might fall on Mikal Bridges too. It's just like he's more of his possessions with the Knicks have come like as cuts than they did in Brooklyn last year, which might speak to the pecking order of it all. But
Right.
yeah, I would have to compare it. I wonder what he was at during his final year in Phoenix, of like what percentage of his plays were coming off cuts. Was probably something that I should look at. But they were always going to be one of the most polarizing teams.
Right.
They have not done anything to look, a higher percentage of Mikal Bridges' offensive possessions this year are coming as cuts in New York than they did during that final year in Phoenix.
Okay.
And even look, 2021, 22, was that made it to the finals that year? Was that season, or was that 21?
I feel I want to say 21 and 22 were the Warriors, right?
It's even higher than that. And then you look at 2020 and 2021, like, okay, that's the year that it was higher. But he was like, we've talked about someone who's leveled up from, we think he could just move off the ball, to like, this guy can do some extra stuff. So
right.
they're a tough study. And I think this is all stuff that you could have looked at, though, with everything that we've talked about. You could have looked at the makeup of the roster and said, injuries and all. I could see this being an issue. The Mikal Bridges of it all, even the Jalen Brunson of it all a little bit, like some of the crunch time moments for sure. That's the stuff that was a little bit unpredictable. And so we're talking about what everyone assumed was going to be their two most consistent and best offensive players. And so you kind of almost have to trust that maybe Karl-Anthony Towns is good enough that Mikal Bridges is no longer number 2 there. But I get a lot of I've already seen just flashes from Jalen Brunson getting better. And so I think we could default to the Knicks being in better shape, but I would just reiterate that I still think they're one player away.
And it's also early. We have to acknowledge
at some point it's not, though. It's early until it's not. We're talking what is 15% of the season in the books or something? That's not nothing.
I mean, so there's 85% left.
Right. But we know a lot of the times, like 20 games into the season, 21, 22, 25, that's when a lot of this stuff.
That gives you 12 games, Dan. 12 games.
Which gives them another that says like half the season that's telltale is in the book. So half of your season that you get to the point of before we know their identity and who they are. So they're 50% of the way through, and you and I have talked in circles for 35 minutes about them.
No, but it's fair. I just wanted to get your take on it, and it did not disappoint.